Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome to Gender and Society. This is lecture number 9, where we will be discussing technology, family and marriage, particularly looking at the idea of the role of technology in the domestic spaces, in the domestic sphere of life. So, we will start with a couple of key questions here. How do inclusion of technology in domestic spaces inform gender relations, and what are some of the factors contributing to differential usage patterns, if at all, of technology within the domestic spaces. So, we have seen that scholarship has increasingly been invested in understanding the implications of technology, particularly the role of communication technologies such as use of computers, use of the internet, use of mobile phones, and how they are used within the family life. So, how have these technologies influenced family life, influenced domestic spaces. And so, we have these several questions that some of them are still unanswered, some of them are not really researched adequately. So, whether family members influence each other's use of technology, or once a technology is adopted, do they continue using it with the same degree or not. So, these are some of the questions that are yet to be looked at. What we will do in this lecture is to walk through some of the theoretical frameworks for understanding technologies, particularly in the domestic sphere, domestic spaces, and then talk of a couple of examples within the domestic spaces as they relate to power dynamics, power negotiations within family and marriage, within domestic spaces. So, we will start with the understanding what is established in scholarship as the technology acceptance model, or TAM, which is premised on an idea that there is a perceived ease of use and a perceived usefulness that correlate with system use, and this is a relationship that explains why people accept or reject a technology. So, this is a larger picture. The TAM model is a larger picture that is also applicable to the IT, but then here we will look at, we will take the elements of the perceived ease of use and the perceived usefulness to understand how it plays out within the domestic spaces. So, this causal model, the TAM, hypothesizes that actual system use is affected by behavioral intentions, which are themselves affected by attitudes towards use. And this is coming from an economic background, this model. So, it looks at some of these behavioral patterns, some of these usage patterns, and how that informs the ease of use and the usefulness, or the perception of usefulness. Finally, the beliefs about the system of the perceived usefulness and the perceived ease of use in TAM directly affect attitudes towards use. So, in the end, it all boils down to the cultural belief system, the cultural practices that actually influence the system of TAM in this regard. So, it was originally proposed by Davis and others in 1989, where you can see that it is kind of a linear model where you have these external variables, and then you have the ideas of perceived usefulness and perceived ease of use, which cater towards influencing somebody's attitude towards using a technology in this case. And then comes the idea of the behavioral intention to use. So, what is the again the perceived usefulness and the intention with which the technology is being adopted, and then finally the actual system use. So, this is a very simple way of understanding how the technology acceptance model actually pans out to understanding the use of technology within the domestic sphere. Now, we have seen that TAM has attracted a growing body of research, which originally started with dealing with emails and graphics. So, that is one of the first areas where TAM was actually used, and this was later on extended to voicemail and word processor, to understanding spreadsheets and database management systems, adaptive technology for the physically challenged. So, the use of TAM, the application of the TAM has been across quite a platform, and much of these, as you will see, when we talk of emails, when we talk of graphics, voicemail, working with spreadsheets, or adaptive technology for physically challenged, all of them actually crisscross path with domestic lifestyle, with domestic spaces. However, we do see that there is a lack of gender based work in TAM, and the possible impact of gender on IT diffusion has been ignored in the earlier works of TAM. And we see that gender has been generally missing from the IT behavioral research, and gender and computer based management information systems has remained relatively unexplored in this regard. So, the gender differences in the perception and use of emails, with regard to this, we see that there is an acceptance of unequal power distance distribution. Now, the interest in understanding the role of gender in technology actually comes from feminist scholarship, with an assumption that women tend to use technology less than men because of a value system that is underlying that the new technologies are fundamentally masculine. So, one of the starting points is that there is an acceptance of unequal power distance distribution. This power geometry is negotiated. Uncertainty avoidance, acceptance of individualism, and disposition towards masculine attitudes and behaviors. So, we see that gender differences are one aspect of the overall cultural differences that exist between human beings, and we see that as we have talked about previously, national and ethnic gender differences constitute the socio-cultural factors that influence perceptions and behavior. So, if you take an example of any technology, so whether it's a mobile phone or a computer or a microwave oven or a dishwasher or a washing machine, any technology that you can think of is that we see today in most households within domestic spaces. We see that they are not just a product of a perceived ease of use or a perceived usefulness. They are also as much a product of the gendered understanding of national, ethnic, socio-cultural factors that influence the a person's behavior or adoption behavior towards these technology. In this respect, there is a very significant work done by Smitha Radhakrishnan, where she talks about gender, society and communication technology. And here Radhakrishnan actually interviewed software engineers in Silicon Valley and Bangalore, and looked at the phenomenal growth in India's IT industry that has produced a transnational class of professionals who are actively engaged in constructing a notion of new India that is global in scope yet Indian in a sense. And much of these recreation of idea of an Indianness starts from the intimate sphere, as we see that starts from what are the changing values, what are the changing family values, what are the changing values within family, within marriage, within other sorts of domestic relationships. So we also see the role of professional women playing a critical role in reinventing the Indian family and a new kind of global Indianness in this work. So it's not just the appliances or the technology that one uses within the domestic space, but also the role of technology that is outside the domestic space, but that has a clear influence, a very strong influence on redefining a domestic space. So what emerges from this work is a new discourse of belonging to India as a fundamentally gendered one that relies on the ability of professional women to make delicate balances between an Indian home life and a global professional life. And all of these are actually posited on the intersections of gender, class and nation using an intersectionality lens. So there is a new way of thinking, a new discourse, a new way of conversing, that there is an idea of global Indianness which is is generated through a gendered idea that there's a Indian home life and a global professional life, and much at the center of this is the IT industry and the role of gender in formulating that new domestic space. So we also see that gender plays out in many levels in online communication. So we often believe that the internet is said to be inherently democratic, and it levels out traditional distinctions of social status, creating opportunities for less powerful individuals and groups to participate on a par with members of more powerful groups. So we do see that the internet or access to the internet actually has functioned quite democratically, and it levels out several of these distinctions between social status, between creating opportunities for less powerful versus those who have more power. So it has worked as a leveler, it has worked as a flattener. So some of the claims in this regard include a text-based computer-mediated communication that makes gender online communicators irrelevant or invisible. So oftentimes online communication gender remains invisible if until the time it is actually brought into focus. And as a network connecting geographically dispersed users, the internet empowers women and members of other traditionally subordinate groups to find community and organize politically in pursuit of their own interest. Finally, we see the World Wide Web, which allows women to self-publish and engage in profitable entrepreneurial activity on par with men. So while we see that the internet has been a leveler in this respect, that provides almost equal opportunities for the users, but the very assumption that there is a difference in power play, the very assumption that there is power inequality in terms of gender comes from much of the earlier understanding that the biological sex and gender are synonymous. So the cultural signifiers, the cultural coding that we do with human beings in terms of gender, following cues from the biological condition is the underlying premise of understanding this inequality. Another way of looking at how technology has played an important role within the domestic spaces is to look at gender and language and the role of technology in that. So we have seen that men and women tend to use and understand language in different ways, a finding that can help to explain specific gender differences in computer-based communication media choice. So the language that a person uses can be gendered, can have gendered connotation, and sociolinguistic researchers, they argue that women and men have different social norms for conversational interaction, and to such an extent that they even form distinct speech communities. So we see that the discourse around gender and language can be gender specific. So male patterns of communication tend to be based on the notion of a social hierarchy, and female patterns on the other hand tend to be network oriented. So and at the bottom of all this, as a theoretical premise, we have the deep structure of language as proposed by Saussure in 1960 of Lang and Parole, that one is a system and the other is the practice, and language in this case, or the use of language in this case, has a huge gender connotation, we see, and this also translates to the use of technology, language and gender and technology. For example, you can see that there was a lot of discussion that went on with Siri, with Siri's voice being whether a woman or a man, and there's quite a few articles that have been invested in understanding that why we need to talk about that. So research has shown that people apply gender biases even to digital voices. So the very fact that even a digital voice such as Siri has a woman and has a male and a female voice is to show that people do ascribe these gender scripts even to digital voices. Researchers speculated that changing Siri's gender could actually alter how people use the device. So as you will read in several of these articles, that there has been a lot of speculation about people changing their usage pattern depending on the nature of the Siri's voice, whether it's male or female. And whether Siri's gender would change the nature of people's queries is something that is yet to be researched. That the type of things that people use to look up on their phone and ask Siri to find, this is an ongoing part of research, that how do people's behavioral patterns actually change with Siri's changing gender voice. So with this we come to an understanding of another theoretical framework called technological determinism, which is a paradigm that tends to overlook the fact that the development and uses of any technology are themselves embedded in a social context and are shaped by that context. So A technological determinism paradigm is one that extracts out the social context from its understanding, and technology is looked at totality. The social context is actually not highlighted. So, the question here is, does the internet, something that is widely used across domestic spaces, alter deeply rooted cultural patterns of gender inequality, or do those patterns carry over into online communication? So, we know that the internet usage, if you take a global average, almost equal number of women and men use internet applications if it is available to them, if it's accessible by them. However, we see that the pattern of usage, the nature of use, and the reasons for using internet vary according to gender. So, this is one of the starting questions, that do those patterns carry over into online communication? And the second question is, internet technology inherently gender neutral, or does the fact that if it was created by men then would result in an inbuilt structural bias that perpetuate male advantage and vice versa? So, if there is an androcentric bias, then would it result in an inbuilt structural bias that perpetuates male advantage? And oftentimes it turns out to be true that the data that is fed in is biased, is gender biased, and therefore much of the search results that you see on the internet, they have a gender bias, and there has been a lot of work, academic work that has been invested to find out how and why this this data is gender biased, and much of this work comes from the area of artificial intelligence, AI. So, if you are interested to take a look at some of those research, please look up some of these gender bias research in terms of data as gender bias, research on gender data as gender bias from the AI perspective. So, the next question is then, how is gender represented graphically and symbolically on the web, and to what extent are women and men involved in creating and administering web content? So, we see that there are graphical representations or virtual realities. We have commercialization, and we have community and political organization, all spanning the World Wide Web. And so the question is, how much of this is graphically or symbolically represented through gender. Another point here is to consider that we have empirical findings that show that differential use of technology in a significant way comes from occupational differences between women and men. So, income, education linked to employment also help in influencing the use of technology in this regard. Now, when we are talking about gender, we cannot leave out the other axis also. So, if we look at Jackson's study on race, gender and the IT use, the new digital divide, we see that there over time the idea of the digital divide has shifted. So, we see that digital divide was coined in the late 20th century to refer to the gap between those who had access to new information technology and those who did not. And it was primarily on income and education, socio-demographic characteristics. That was the classical idea of the digital divide. And the new meaning of digital divide is referring to the gap in the intensity and nature of IT use rather than the gap in access to it. So, the first idea was whether digital divide was, a particular technology was accessible to a population or a group of people, and the new meaning of the digital divide is that whether there is a gap in the intensity and nature of IT use rather than to the gap in access to it. So, that is an understanding we have to take from here to understand how the various technologies play out in the domestic sphere. So, how does the internet foster gender equality? We have seen that the internet has often acted as a leveler, a flattener, but then how does it at all foster equality? So, how does one understand equality, and how does one understand the relationship between reality and the virtual world? So, in order to do that, let us look at some of the social dynamics of innovation and domestication. So, we see that democratic society and the role of citizens in constructing society has been quite significant. So, we see that the role of ICTs, mobile phones, internet, personal computers, and the debates around their adoption and use has been quite significant in published scholarship. So, these this literature have talked about non-technically minded people and their use and of such technologies. Whether ICTs can only be tools to enhance user experiences, or can they provide solutions to particular problems if they are perceived as such. So, we go back to the TAM model of perceived use, and then the visions to be realized to expand usage. So, scholars have talked around these areas, and the idea of social dynamics where technology cannot alone create an ideal society. So, we are trying to understand the role of technology in a particular area of society, and we see that social dynamics between potential users and those in their social environment play out a huge deal in this respect between users and other stakeholders such as engineers and designers, producers, policymakers and managers, that shape which ICTs will be used, how they will be used, and what type of society will emerge. So, again, there is a very complex network between those who produce these technologies and those who use these technologies. So, the network between engineers, designers, producers, policymakers, managers, and finally the end users, which shape what sort of technology is going to be catered to that society, and what type of social change or what type of society will emerge out of such a negotiation, such a power geometry. So, next we see what are some of the patterns of adoption and integration of ICTs within society and within the domestic sphere. So, we see that sociological studies, both quantitative and qualitative, have shown studies of user interfaces and the usability of ICTs, and they have examined wider issues beyond the design of very particular products. So, launching a technology or introducing a technology to a society, the design is of course an important part, but there is larger social context at play between the producers and the users, and this is what several of the sociological studies have focused on. And consuming technologies, that part of scholarship has focused on to look at technologies being consumed increasingly in the domestic context, and technologies consuming us, the users, or transforming us to the potential inherent in them. So, there is a huge deal of influence that technologies actually have on the users, and a very strong influence in shaping the domestic context, the domestic spheres, relationship within a domestic context in this regard that technologies are capable of in transforming. So here we take a look at one of the social theories that is applicable in this technology user interaction between a human non-human interaction, and this is the actor network theory proposed by and several theorists, and Bruno Latour have has been one of the proponents, where he says that when we believed that we were modern, we could content ourselves with the assemblies of society and nature. But today we have to restudy what we are made of and extend the repertoire of ties and the number of associations way beyond the repertoire proposed by social explanation. So, this is coming from his very significant work, We Have Never Been Modern, and where he examines a Eurocentric history of sociology, of scientific knowledge, where he talks about the relationship between the human and the non-human, and what are the implications of these associations. So, from the actor network theory, we see that nature, society and technology are seen not as priori starting points or privileged means of explanation. So, we see that the actor network theory refers to these agents as actors or actants, and it presumes that each actor carries no necessary or pre-existing qualities other than those that are constructed within a network within which it necessarily finds itself. And as a result, it maps a semiosis of material entities. So, in short, what the actor network theory talks is that the network of nature, society and technology, none of these are a priori. So, none of these are pre-existing, but they all converge, they interact and converge to produce one total understanding, one total experience, and one way of understanding that experience is the actor network theory. Actually raises some central questions. So, what is the significance of how we relate to each other for the technologies we live with? And how are the basic needs and activities that define home life and togetherness, like cooking, cleaning, caring, defined by and accomplished within socio-technical relations? So, this is a very significant questions that the ANT, the actor network theory proposes. That first, that what is the significance of how we relate to each other for the technology. So, when relationships are based on, say, technologies such as communication technologies, or when home life or togetherness is based on technologies that help cooking, cleaning or caring. So, what are the significance of these relationships, significance of these networks? How does contemporary culture connect technological and relational aspects of close personal relationships such as those of family? And how are the objective experiences of the world expressed in relation with the material and the subjective world, and based on the self and on personal evaluations of relationships with others, defined and expressed in the engagements with everyday home life and the machines we use? So, again, the relationships that are influenced and the experiences that have been objective in a subjective world. So, how are these relationships redefined, if at all, through the use of technologies within the domestic sphere? So, no general model of how people use objects can ignore household practices and relations. So, irrespective of which technology that you use, it is difficult to ignore its influence on household practices and relations, and the reverse is also true, that no general model of household practices and relations can ignore how people use objects. But when those objects are communication and information technologies such as televisions, telephones, video and computers, the problems of modeling becomes extremely complex. So, again you see that the role of the actor network theory becomes increasingly important here, as we try to understand that the relationships that we have with the non-human artifacts, the non-human things, technologies, they are powerful enough to redefine these relationships, and how that happens is socially contextual. So, for example, if you take the moral economy of the household and you try to understand the ethnography of the car, or the usage pattern of a computer, you see that spaces are constructed, spaces are negotiated, even within within inside a car. That is a technology that actually is used for domestic purposes also. So, how are spaces not just within the home, but also technology that actually moves out of the domestic space, but yet is linked with the domestic relations, how are those spaces also negotiated. So, these are very interesting ways to understand the how technology permeates into our lives, permeates into social life, into domestic life, and recreates many of these spaces, recreates many of these relations between people. So, as I was saying, that the domestic as space constructions is variously approximated to the household, to the family and to the private. So, when I say domestic space, it usually is the space within the household that the family shares, but it can also extend to spaces such as a car, or spaces that are outside the household yet shared by the family. The product of a particular set of historical conditions which emerged with industrial societies. So, again, space construction, particularly with regard to the domestic sphere, has historical roots. So, there has been historical conditions, particularly with regard to the industrial revolution, the rise of industrial societies, which has produced certain types of domestic spaces where technologies are used, and it is defined through its necessary and constant interrelationship with the public sphere. So, it is not mutually exclusive, it is not detached from the public sphere, but it is constantly in relationship with the public sphere, and this is how domestic space is constructed and informed, that is in relationship with its public sphere. So, you see that the idea of a domestic space construction can be again a work in progress, and so when technology actually enters a domestic space, it is entering a set of power relations, a set of relations that are already operative. So, it is interesting to see that how does a particular technology, whether it is a mobile phone, or it is a a washing machine, or it is a television, or it is a refrigerator, how is that technology entering into an already power geometry, already negotiated power geometry, and how is it if at all altering that power geometry within that domestic space. So, we we'll look at one such example, the microwave oven, and this is quite a ubiquitous item that we see in a common household these days. So if you look at the technology itself, so it embodies its relations of design and production. So there is we have a set of designers who is conceiving the idea, who's designing the product, and then producing it. These relations are, among class and other things, a matter of ethnicity and gender. So it is very socially contextual that what type of microwave would a family buy, if they buy at all, and then it is heavily informed by the class and other axis of differences that influence gender. So there is a decision making process that continues to influence whether, starting from a decision whether there would be a need to introduce a technology within a domestic space, to deciding what type of technology, and then finally once the technology is adopted within that domestic space, what is its role. So studies have shown that studies that have focused on the microwave oven as a technology that has entered the domestic space, the negotiation between cooks who are mainly women and those for whom they cook, that are mainly men and children, concerning what is good cooking, and given a certain product, its combination of microwave and convection heat sources. So there are a couple of important assumptions in this, that again we go back to the biological understanding that several of these gender roles like cooking and cleaning are often equated with women, and then the idea of the provider is often equated with male, and this assumption gets translated here also, assuming that this is a technology primarily that would be used by the cooks, who would primarily be women, and catering to the providers, who are primarily men. So you see that how very subtle power geometries are negotiated with assumptions or perceived assumptions that we have talked about earlier. So we see that some of these research have also focused on the fact that microwave brings forward from the factory into the kitchen certain relational possibilities. So once you have introduced a technology such a microwave within the domestic sphere, you have you may have a change in eating habits, you may have health concerns such as radiation, etc., with the introduction of technology within the domestic space. So finally what happens is, in this case, the microwave oven enters a household where certain relations are already well embedded. So as I said, a technology is entering a household or entering a power geometry, a power negotiation that is already been negotiated, and this is where the role of technology comes in, that is it influencing the existing power relations in terms of gender, or is it how is it recreating or reproducing another power geometry. So the next question that we can look at is, what kind of gendered identities people ascribe from domestic technologies, and how these gender divisions are constituted. So are gendered identities people ascribe from domestic technologies significant, and how are these constituted? So with that we see that there is the social construction of technology, that we see gender and technology as seen as co-produced. So one is producing or influencing the other, and here is a parallel that is drawn between social construction of gender and the social construction of technology, and in which each are seen as performed and processual in character rather than giving an unchanging. So there's some significant research done in this respect, where they've talked about the social construction of gender, which we already have talked about, and the social construction of technology, which is a whole different area of study, in which it is seen that both are processual, both are evolving, and both are influencing each other. And technology not just affects gender relations and identities, but also gender has an impact on technologies, their development and design. So again, it's a symbiotic relationship, and consequently it is possible to create gender sensitive technology, but how it is used by whom and when and what are the final causes cannot be forecasted, since users with different gender identities have an ability to modify artifacts to suit their purposes. So what happens is, most of these technologies have a gender ascription, a gender code assigned to them, with an assumption, with a prior assumption that what sort of users will be using such a technology. However, it cannot be forecasted, since completely, since much of these users have the ability to modify these artifacts to suit their purposes. So this alteration in turn affects the technology, the ways it is designed, and more importantly what is considered worthwhile to be designed. So again, it's a an iterative way of understanding a technology, that when something is designed and tested on a society, and then there's a society's feedback on that technology, and then it's a feedback loop. In order to understand that, we need a little bit of exposure to understanding how we understand material culture. So we see that objects and artifacts are a central part of our everyday lives and surrounding culture. They affect our mundane activities through their physical appearance and by having an ability to restrict or enable our actions. So this falls in or this brings in, borrows from another area of study, where culture is looked at from all these various angles, and material culture is one of these lenses, that objects and artifacts are a central part of cultural life, and what sort of power do they have to influence social life. And objects do not only have visible physical essence, but they are able to create, mediate and sustain different meanings which are linked to wider patterns of surrounding culture. So they also create, mediate and sustain different meanings, creating cultural patterns. So now with that understanding, we need to understand how inscription and description of technical devices take place in society. So designers, when they are thinking of a technology, thinking of a product, they inscribe their ideas of the world in a technical device. Whether intentional or not is not clear in research, and users read those as codes. So these are called gender codes oftentimes in these technical devices. This means that not all people perceive and ascribe the same gadgets the same way, and this reading process may be quite different to what designers had expected. So some person or a group of people are designing a product with certain presumptions, with certain assumptions of how the use pattern would be, and then when it is actually reaching the users who are interpreting these codes in that technical device, it may be so that these perception or the ascription of these codes may not match with what the designers had planned. So this constant understanding of ascribing or describing a product is referred to as gender script of a product in scholarship. So gender script refers to the representations and artifacts designers have or construct of gender relations and gender identities, representations that they then inscribe into the materiality of that artifact. So again, in other words, it's a a gender code, a gender script that is attached to any particular gadget. And very interesting study was done to show that what are some of the gender codes or gender scripts attached to some of the commonly used household technical devices or appliances. So as you can see from this chart that some of the most neutral ones are radio, microwave oven, refrigerator and a coffee maker. The most feminine ones are hair dryer and washing machine, and most masculine ones were gender scripted were stereo equipment, computer, television, a VHS player or a DVD player. So you see that if you now reflect back and think for yourself some of the technologies that are used within your domestic sphere, that is there a gender code to these devices or appliances or technologies, and if yes, are they masculine, are they feminine, or do they not have a gender code? So it's an interesting exercise that you can do by yourself. So looking at scholarship and trying to understand how gadgets have gender, there are three discourses that help us understand how the gender script of any technology can be understood. The expertise discourse, the appearance and sound discourse, and the anthropomorphism discourse. So the expertise discourse talks about who understands the gadget better, that is, who maintains, updates and counsels others to use the device. In the expertise talk, the gender division was justified also by who is considered to be more interested in the device, and the newness of technology affected the perceived gender of technologies in this way also expertise. So this discourse basically looks at a perceived understanding of who is going to use the gadget, and a perceived ease of use going back to the TAM model. The appearance and sound discourse is another commonly used way to divide technology into masculine and feminine categories, and this is done by their appearance. So as I just showed you on the chart that these devices have a gender script attached to them oftentimes, and one way of understanding this gender script is through appearance or sound that a device makes. And finally, the anthropomorphism discourse, which is the most obvious way to divide domestic technologies into genders by thinking who uses them more often. So the usage patterns and who is using it more often is the anthropomorphism discourse, saying that if for example a particular category of people, say males or females, and by saying that I'm by no means homogenizing either of these two categories, uses them more often, and that by going by that is going to confer on the device or the technology a gender script. So this is again as we find in existing scholarship that there are these masculine and feminine attributes of domestic technologies, going by the discourse that I just talked about. The appearance, usability, technicality, sound, rate of novelty use, and then you see that it is possible, and it actually happens, that designers, producers, even users, they differentiate or apply these gender codes to these devices. So in conclusion, we do have several questions arising then. So if we think of the circuit of technology in terms of gender identity and power, then what do we mean by social when we speak of technology, right? what do we mean by technology when we speak of gender, what is the connection between technology and power, and what kind of power are we talking about. So, going by everything that we have seen in this lecture, these are 4 very, very broad questions that I want to leave you with to reflect on, that what are these subtle ways of relationships between the social and the technology and the gender, technology and power. So, how does gender, identity and power all pan out to form a circuit of technology that we can use to understand intimate relations such as in family and marriage. And I do want to leave you with an overall question here, that how does technology redefine gender power relations in domestic space. And if you are interested to read more on this, you can look up this article, which is a very recent 2015 article by Greenwood and others. And in the next lecture, I will take up the topic of gender and education. Thank you.